Hey everyone, this is Drew with Scaffold, and we've got a new release this week. One that I'm pretty excited about. We're adding the ability to diff or compare two different documents or two different versions of documents. This really helps for being able to keep track of what changes Scaffold may have made, or if you're bringing in a document from another party, being able to check what is different between their document and the document that you have. So this will show all of the changes in text, in formatting, and I'll show you an example of that, but you can look at the release on our website in our releases page. So let's jump in and see what we can do. We're going to build from a redline first, and then we'll do a comparison of the new version. So I just asked Scaffold to let me upload a new document. I threw in this confidentiality agreement, and it jumps me to the view. Now, I just go ahead and say I want to make, let's say, a couple changes here, make it more defensible for somebody in manufacturing, and it's going to download the tools from Scaffold and start working on a redline for me. As it reads, it's going to be able to more easily locate all the different places where it wants to make changes. So when I name 1.1, it can surgically look for that section inside the document. And I'm thinking it's going to make changes either to these actual lettered points or add them after G, which it can now do while honoring formatting and seeing exactly what it's done. When it finishes, it can also then run the compare to be able to know whether its changes landed where it expected. So this is a little bit more, if you're from a more technical background, like GitHub behaves. And it's why coding agents are so powerful with tools like GitHub. I think the real value is that in GitHub, you can not only make changes and save them, but you get attribution of who the author is, as well as a traceability of who's made changes where, and the ability to revert changes. We've now added all of that to Scaffold, so it gives sort of a first-class experience to an AI agent, working almost like a coding agent. And we're thinking of this project more as Git for Word, which is to say we want full command of the Word interface, as well as full command of the Word backend in order to make a bunch of changes. So Claude is effectively discovering what tools it can use as it works, and it's being helped by all of the different commands it makes. So when it misses, for example, it's getting back a response that says, well, you need to include this piece. So it's trying to do a batch edit, all the things it wants to change at once. It's going to flub the tooling a little bit while it figures it out. And you can notice it didn't pull the help, so it doesn't have the full command sheet. So there we go. So now it realized I should probably get some help, and that's actually going to tell it exactly how to do the editing. And now this one should land, and it'll come back and display it for us. All right, so to skip to when it finished its first change here, we can now see that the change has landed with its explanation of why it did it, and that track change now also attributes that Scaffold did it for my user. It also timestamps it using a UTC timestamp so that we have consistent timestamps across any users in any time zones. And this now is a clear way to have attribution both in the Scaffold UI, but also, and I'll go ahead and pull down a download of this, it will also show up inside of the Word view. So if we pull this over and go to the change, and I click here, you can see that it actually attributes this to the Scaffold Assistant for my email, and it includes that timestamp. So we now have that traceability built into the actual Word download so that when you exchange them, it's easy to know who added and changed what. And to go back, one of the nice things now is if I wanted to, I could jump back and forth and look at what's different across these documents. So let's say that we'd gotten through the process and we'd accepted these changes. And now we're a few versions down the road, and it's hard to know exactly what's different between this version and the other version. Well, that's where we've launched Compare to offer a new way to look at documents side by side and figure out what's different. So you can see that it pulled up the last document I'd used, and it's comparing version 2 to version 2. Well, there's nothing different between version 2 and version 2. They're the same document. But if I flip to version 1 here, you can see that it immediately pulls up this track difference, and it shows what changed. So here now I've got this highlight of all of the things that have changed inside of this item, and it's listed out a bunch of other basically sub-items. I can also track the differences by opening a differences menu here. So if you had many differences, which is quite common in a larger document, you can go straight to them by clicking here and navigate through a pane this way instead of having to click through the differences. So that's going to be a little bit better experience for anybody who's having to sort through a lot of different changes. And it lets you then check, for instance, anything that's already been accepted. And it also allows you to revert. So one of the nice things that we can do here is we can either take version 2 and pull it into version 1, which would be pull to base. So that means that any changes that exist in version 2, we now rebase into version 1 because let's say we've made some improvements to this particular contract and we want every contract that's sourced out of that core version 1 to hold those changes, right? I can do that. Or I can revert it in compare, which means that for this change or this difference, I can change version 2 to make it match version 1 again. So let's say that I don't want to do this with my version 2. I've decided, honestly, this formatting, not exactly what I want, right? It needs to do a more surgical edit here. I can do revert in compare, and it's going to make the change in version 2 to eliminate that section expansion. You can see now the two versions are marked with no difference. Well, let's go back to our redline view. Let's pull up version 2. And let's see that version 2, it no longer has that massive change in addition to the G article, the G clause. So this is a really helpful tool for being able to compare two documents, but also then revert their changes. And the nice thing that the AI agents have, like Claude, is that they have the power not to rebase your documents. They can't make those changes themselves. Everything is still in your control. But the nice thing they can do is if they've made a change that's a little gross and you want them to go back, revert it, and try it again, they now have the power to basically eliminate their former changes and retry them. That's a little bit, again, more like how Git behaves, and it's going to be, I think, a solid improvement to how the AI works effectively in this system. As just an example, with these new tools, I'm able to work with 3 documents at once. So if I have my confidentiality agreement, my master services agreement, and an SOW, and I've got changes requested from my client, I can now do those changes across all 3 documents at once, and Claude's able to keep track of what's actually changed as it works. That's exactly the flow that we want Scaffold to have, and this new compare tool, along with the tooling that Claude gets under the hood, help it keep track of where it's at to behave more like a coding agent across our different Word documents. So that's a basic and introduction to the compare tool, which you can now use across all your documents manually, or you can ask Claude to run a comparison for you. It can display a comparison between 2 documents or their versions. And I want to note that you don't just have to pick the same document and pick different versions of it. You can also compare a document to a completely different document. And in this case, it's going to have a ton of differences. It's got different titles, it's got completely different text, and the way that it's going to look is it's taking the confidentiality agreement and it's showing anything that was removed from the confidentiality agreement and overlaying what is different in the SOW. And so you can see it's overlaying pretty much the entire SOW on top of the now deleted confidentiality agreement. And these 136 differences, you can now look through this list in order to head to them. And you can also see just a basic what's a similarity measure between 2 documents. And so you can see this is not the same document. Whereas when you use 2 different versions of a document, you might find that it's 99% similar. So that gives you a sense of how different or how many changes there are, just generally speaking. And then you can, of course, rebase or revert if you want. Of course, this becomes dangerous, so be sure that you know what you're doing when you are pulling something back either across versions, or if I were to accidentally, let's say, pull this into my confidentiality agreement. Something to be aware of, and that's why the AIs cannot do this themselves, but we have left you guys the ability to do that in case you had 2 different documents and needed to merge them effectively. All right, well, that's everything that I wanted to cover about this week's release. Really excited to get you guys into it and trying it out. As always, happy to answer any questions. If you come find my email on the website, drew@scaffoldyourdocs.com. So happy to hear from anyone and try to address any confusion, changes, or improvements that you could name. Thanks, everybody.